the Seattle Times chose a very odd part of the presidential debate to spend time fact-checking. This segment is brought to you by Eastside Weight Loss Clinic. I'm down 37 pounds on the program, and I lost most of that weight in just 2 months. There's no prepackaged meals, no counting calories, no drugs or injections. Schedule your free 15-minute consultation today at eastsideweightlossclinic.com. So during the presidential debate, Seattle came up, not the first time that former President Donald Trump has talked about our summer of love. Here is the moment.
They're coming in from all over the world, David, all over the world. And crime rates are down all over the world because of it.
But let me just
ask you. David, when are those people going to be prosecuted? When are the people that burned down Minneapolis going to be prosecuted? Or in Seattle? They went into Seattle. They took over a big percentage of the city of Seattle. When are those people going to be prosecuted?
But let me just ask you.
You might ask her that question.
Yeah, I mean, and we've been saying that for a long time. Like, January 6th was bad. I don't feel bad for people who injured police officers on January 6th and are in a federal prison. But, you had Democrats cheering on left-wing political violence for an entire summer. Like, even showing up in Seattle, council members showing up at a takeover of a police precinct and egging it on, encouraging it. And how many people were really arrested during all of that? A couple of the people who lit police cars on fire. They still haven't found the people who murdered, committed one of them, who shot into a car with juveniles up at Chaz Chop. So it's a valid point. In the media, they're always like, well, that's whataboutism. No, it's not. It's a genuine question about, okay, you're losing your minds about January 6th. Fine. Again, fine. But it rings so hollow when you ignore left-wing violence. So the Seattle Times, rather than saying, former President Donald Trump brings up CHOP in response to questions about January 6th. Maybe we should look into, why weren't more people arrested? Why weren't elected leaders more serious about left-wing violence? Maybe we should look into the moral hypocrisy. No, they fact-check his claim that it was a pretty big chunk of Seattle. What was his exact wording? Can you play that one more time?
Large percentage.
Large percentage. So Seattle Times puts out a fact check. Trump falsely claims CHOP protesters took over a big part of Seattle. And in this wonderful fact check, awesome use of their journalistic platform, they literally put up a map with like a little line around the actual portion of Seattle that protesters took over. And it said the zone's size fluctuated, but it essentially occupied about 6 city blocks surrounding the Seattle Police Department's East Precinct building in Cal Anderson Park, extending east to 12th Avenue, west to Broadway, south to East Pine Street, and north to East Denny Way. Okay, do you guys understand how dumb that is? Like, look, I get it. If you're talking about the entirety of the city, is it technically factually accurate for Trump to say big percentage? No. But what you're quibbling about is how the size of the zone that left-wing rioters took over. And so that's what the Seattle Times wants to be very specific. Let's be very specific. It was not a big percentage. It was just a measly 6 square blocks that armed left-wing rioters took over, that city officials said nothing about, that virtually no one faced charges for. In fact, the city of Seattle settled a lawsuit to give some of the protesters who took over that zone money. Like, let's not focus on how bad it actually was and the point that Donald Trump was making. Let's quibble over, how he... Is it a big part of Seattle or not? You realize how dumb that is, right? So anyway, it was funny for a short period of time. This was all over. Elon Musk was tweeting about this because the Seattle Times got community noted on X, which is where readers point out context that's lacking or something that disproves a claim. And the Seattle Times was community noted using their own reporting. The community note said the Seattle Times themselves have reported on the very real incident in June of 2020 where violent protesters forcefully took control of a portion of Seattle's Capitol Hill area that was dubbed Chaz or CHOP, the Capitol Hill organized protest. Now, that community note has since been removed, and the way community notes works is there's some ex-users who have the authority to basically rate and rank community notes. They might have decided, I don't know who did, that it wasn't necessary. And again, I go back to, do I think it needed a community note? Probably not. I think it's funny. Technically, the Seattle Times fact check is accurate. It provides context. Like, no, it wasn't a big percentage of Seattle that was taken over, but it is so petty, biased, and ridiculous that they want to do an entire fact check, quibbling over size, over the former president's characterization of the size of Chop Chaz, and completely ignore the very valid, very serious point he's making about the moral hypocrisy in this country around political violence, depending on the side of the aisle that perpetrates it. And it just continues, it continues to prove his point that we're 3 years past January 6th and Democrats are still obsessed with it. But they've never been asked to answer. They've never been forced to answer or apologize for their support of left-wing violence. Not to mention the left-wing protests, riots, unrest that continue on a fairly regular basis in this country. You know, left-wing, pro-Hamas, anti-Israel people taking over freeways, major bridges, blocking access to major airports like SeaTac. And all of that just sort of gets the meh treatment from the media. Like, they might mention it here and there, but can you imagine if it was Trump supporters? Just wrap your mind around that. If it were Trump supporters who blocked access to a major airport, or who blocked a freeway or the Golden Gate Bridge for hours on end, and you know damn well how different not only the media coverage would be, but how different the police response would be, because it's dictated by politicians. So you know damn well, we said this during the little occupation at the University of Washington. Jay Inslee had jack shit to say about it. It's his alma mater, same with Bob Ferguson, his alma mater, and they didn't have anything to say about it until, later on when it was resolved. And you really think that they wouldn't have had a joint press conference if it were MAGA extremists who were occupying the quad at the University of Washington? Like, of course, there's no moral consistency anymore. No moral consistency. That's what Donald Trump was pointing out. And instead of understand that he had a point, the Seattle Times said, oh, let's use, what is the word I'm looking for? Semantics. Let's do a fact check based on semantics. It's absolutely unbelievable.